Do you have second thoughts about letting your kids or your grandkids play football? With all the stories coming out about these traumatic head injuries that result, so we believe, from people banging their heads around playing football. 663-1270. Jim Walsh on Supertalk 1270 and supertalk1270.com. We're talking about CTE, which is the degenerative head injury disease, which is associated with people getting knocked around in sports like football, although football seems to be pretty unique in the fact that getting knocked around on the head is a standard procedure for the game. You could argue that games like hockey are just as violent, but with hockey, even though you're required to wear a helmet, and that's a good thing, getting knocked around on the head in hockey is it's not the standard procedure kind of thing it is with football. So what about it? If you have kids, and of course with summer coming up, we're going to be starting to think about that. The kids who are interested in football, they're going to be starting to think about it with the arrival of summer, the end of summer with the training for football at all the schools. Do you ever have second thoughts about the idea of your kids, or in some cases your grandkids, playing football? 663-1270. Nick Buonaconti, legendary player for the Miami Dolphins. I came across an article here from Sports Illustrated. The guy has the degenerative head injuries, and it has become a struggle for this gentleman to even put on a shirt due to his disorder. All too familiar a story. He spent 14 years in the NFL as a human battering ram. And he's not the only one. Jim Kick, a teammate of his, reportedly has dementia or early onset Alzheimer's. They're not sure. Bill Stanfill died last year, had dementia. There have been others who died with advanced CTE. Now, they can't know for sure. And we always like to say, including on this show, that correlation does not necessarily mean cause, but you have to admit there is one hell of a good correlation between the two in this case. A lot of people who've played football are developing these problems. They can't know for sure until the players die and they do an autopsy, but come on. You're telling me that repeated blows to the head, this is not going to happen? And yet we still watch football, and some people keep asking the questions. Remember that movie that came out a while back, the one with Will Smith, where he was talking about the head injuries, and everybody was telling him to shut up. Oh, don't talk about that. It's football. It's money. It's football. Well, there's a good point there. People don't want to talk about it. Yeah, we still watch football. A few people have been asking the right questions, but very few people are getting satisfying answers for this. So let me put it right to you. If you have children or grandchildren, even nieces, nephews, whatever, at some point, the boys mainly, they're going to be interested in playing sports, and that's certainly not a bad thing. But what about football specifically? Do you have a problem with that? 663-1270 is the number. Love to hear from you about this. We started off talking about Nick Buonaconti. He has suffered falls, memory loss, confusion. He has trouble putting on his own shirt in the morning. The report on this coming out this week. He's a Hall of Famer, but he says he feels lost. He had a remarkable post-football career as an attorney and a founder of the Miami Project. Yet now he's dealing with this. It doesn't seem fair to me. Let's grab a call here. Good morning. You're on Super Talk 1270. Go ahead, please. Whoops. All right, let's try it again. Good morning. You're on Super Talk 1270. Hello.
Good morning. I was wondering if I can get on and talk about football.
Absolutely, sir. Yeah, what do you think about this? Yeah.
Well, I think that, first of all, that it's kind of maybe a little bit of an attack on football itself. I've read articles saying that soccer has multiple issues like this, too, with the athletes striking the ball with their head.
Well, there is a way
hear that being discussed as much.
Yeah, there is a way to do that will minimize the shock and trauma. I'm told the key is to have your feet off the ground when you hit the ball. Somehow that's supposed to make the shock a lot less.
Really?
I've heard that. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is I hear a lot about, you do hear about pro athletes. I did see the Will Smith movie. It was very well done. I'm a Steeler fan, and it really depicted a lot about the Steeler organization. But, however, I have two high school boys that play football.
Okay.
I'm not concerned about them getting injured or having the CTE. I played a lot of football myself. And is there something you hear about, they've been in the pros for 14, 15 years, 10 years. You don't hear about the younger people dying of this. They only played football in high school or in college. Are you hearing any of that? Where it's not the professional level that is happening?
That's a good question. All the focus, from what I've heard, has been on these professional guys.
Yeah, right.
There may be. I haven't heard about it.
That'd be great. I've not heard that information. That would be wonderful to hear, too. Yeah. And I know in the NFL, obviously, they're bigger, faster, stronger, bigger concussions, bigger collisions. So, anyhow, a very interesting topic. I appreciate being able to listen.
I appreciate your input, sir. Thank you very much for calling in here at Super Talk 1270. All right, 663-1270. I think we're on to something here this morning. The question is, would you have second thoughts about your own children or grandchildren playing football in the high school or do they have Pop Warner around here? Pop Warner, if you don't know, it's basically the equivalent of what Little League is for baseball. Pop Warner is for football, as I understand it. It's a Little League version of football that's independent of the school system as a rule. But of course, most schools of any size, of any consequence, have a football system of their own. And more, we have been hearing these stories on the professional level, on the NFL level. I have yet to hear, the gentleman makes a good point. You don't really hear that much about it on the school level. What about kids who just play high school football or maybe get to college? And that's all they do. They go on and do other things with their lives. If the stories are out there, I would very much, for one, like to hear about them, really. So do you have second thoughts about your kids playing football? 663-1270. Love to hear from you. Jim Walsh on Super Talk 1270. More conversation, your calls coming up.
Right now it's 58.
Dave Ramsey is heard here. Super Talk 1270.
Well, we're talking about football. Article coming out this week, Sports Illustrated, about Nick Bonaconte, legendary player for the Miami Dolphins, who later practiced law and did some charity work in the Miami area. And we now find out he's suffering from the trauma known as CTE, head trauma, degenerative head disease, trauma, if you will. And it brings back, you think of people like Jim Kick, the running back, who lived like a pauper at one point until he was put in assisted care facility. Now, I noticed one thing about these stories. The question is, let me put out the question here, and I did have another thought about this. The question is, do you ever have second thoughts about letting your kids play football on the school level or on any kind of amateur or even the college level because of these stories coming out? Number here is 663-1270. Again, there's not really a lot of solid evidence leading directly from the one to the other. The idea of smashing your heads in, playing football, banging your heads together, and developing these degenerative diseases or afflictions. But you have to admit the correlation is pretty strong. Correlation is not cause, but it's definitely there. And it's got to give you some thought. 663-1270. One thing I've noticed, a lot of these stories we're focusing on involve people who are kind of getting up there. We're talking guys who played football back in the early 70s. 2 points to be made here. Number one, a lot of these guys are really getting up there age-wise. They're getting up to a stage where if they're prone to having these afflictions, they would have them anyway. The other thing is the fact that in the early 70s, we're talking over 40, going on 50 years now, the technology was not as good. Helmets were probably not as good. The medical care was not as good. The question is, have things gotten better since then? Assuming that there is a direct line of cause that can be established. The only way they really know is when one of these guys dies, they do an autopsy on him. And then they know for sure. But there's so many of these players, you really got to wonder. I'm not a doctor. I don't even play one on radio. But you really got to wonder if there's any real connection here. And does it make you have second thoughts if your own children or your own grandchildren, if they're going to play football or if they've expressed interest? And, of course, we're getting into the summer now, so this would be the time when they're starting to think about it. Because as summer begins, they're starting to think ahead to, in some cases, the more conscientious guys, they'll be starting to exercise and get in shape, if they're not already in shape, for the beginning of the football training season. Or if you got kids who are just getting ready to start high school, it's something that they may be thinking about. But do these stories about the guys with the dementia and the other head trauma afflictions, do they make you want to not see your kid get into football? That would be the question. Number is 663-1270. Previous gentleman was asking about stories like this on the school level. They do exist. There are not that many of them out there. They are few and far between, but they can be found. I did a quick Google search during the break. I found a story from USA Today. I didn't even know USA Today was still publishing. Does anybody read that anymore? Maybe if you're on an airplane. They used to have good crosswords, I remember that. But anyway, USA Today had this story from December of last year, right at the high point of the NFL season, where they were talking about high school football and students who supposedly had head injuries that resulted from playing high school. Again, the problem is you've got the correlation, but establishing a direct line of cause is such a fuzzy thing for a lot of these kids. But you got to wonder. You really got to wonder. Anyway, we'll leave that there. That'll be something we can talk about here. The whole question of the correlation and whether it affects you and your decision to allow your kids to play football. 663-1270. Good morning. You're on Super Talk 1270. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just want to make a comment about the school that my boys play high school football at. And I think most schools in North Dakota have become more conscientious and more prepared for concussions and the concussion protocol that they use when students are, I suppose, the old term being their head bell rung or dinged or whatever.
Yeah.
There's such a better observation, and the medical staff that deal with kids right away is so much better.
I would assume it's a lot better than when I was manager of the football team back in 1971.
Right. So, am I concerned? Yes. Do I not want them to play football? No, I want them to experience football.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks for calling Super Talk 1270, supertalk1270.com. Let's see here. And while we're talking, do we want to talk about the Penn State? Oh, I got a story here about Penn State hazing death. And once again, raising the whole question about hazing. I don't know. You know, there are colleges who do the hazing thing and they do it right. And let me explain what I mean by that. I talked to a friend of mine who went to Towson State University, which is in suburban Baltimore, and he pledged one of the fraternities. I had no interest in the fraternities when I went to college, none whatsoever. It just wasn't even on my personal radar. I had other things going. But I know for some guys it's a family thing. Their dad did it, their granddad did it, so they got to do it too, and their kids will do it whenever. But there's a story about a hazing death happened at one of the fraternities at Penn State, raising the question of why hazing exists. And there have been a couple of movies about it. There's a column by a guy who made a movie about it. He says it serves some kind of primal human need for being part of a tribe. I don't know if that's plausible or not. Like I say, I was perfectly happy not to join a frat. It was just something I didn't even think about. I remember when I started college and all the frats had the big thing, smoker, Friday night smoker, whatever a smoker is. I guess that's where you sit there and you smoke cigarettes and you talk about joining the fraternity. But a friend of mine, he went to Towson State University, and he had a great hazing story, if you can really call this hazing. Because when people talk about hazing, they're talking about the bad stuff, the stuff that verges on physical or psychological torture. But this was a great example of doing it right. If you're going to do it, you got to do it right. And this is a good example. What he said was, when he pledged the fraternity, there was him and another guy who came in together, and they put them together as dual pledges. And what they did to haze them is that they had them sleeping. In the middle of the night, while they were sleeping, they woke these guys out of a dead sleep. They told them to get dressed, and of course they were real fuzzy. They put blindfolds on them. They put them in the back of a car, and they drove all the way from Baltimore to Philadelphia. And then they took the blindfolds off these two guys and dropped them off in downtown Philly in the middle of the night. It was like 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And they didn't have any money, no IDs, and they said, the two of you guys have got to learn to work together to get back. And they did. They figured out a way to do it. They did it by teaming up and pooling their ideas, and basically they got back somehow from Philly to Towson State and learned something very valuable, and that's how they got. I thought that was a very cool story because nobody really got hurt. Some people, I suppose, would argue, oh, they're downtown Philadelphia. Well, Philly is, like any other town. It's probably no better or no worse than a lot of big cities. I happen to know Philadelphia pretty well. But I think it's a great story about building character, about doing it the right way. If you're going to have the hazing thing, unlike what happened with Penn State, the stories involving drinking, where you got to drink or you got to grab the you got to grab the olive out of the martini with your butt cheeks and then walk over and drop it in a shot glass. Stupid stuff like that's kind of stupid more than anything, but stuff that involves a heavy-duty drinking or drinking of really hot sauce and some of the other weird stuff. I always wondered if sororities do that too. You never hear these stories of, is there such a thing in a sorority as hazing? Do the ladies get hazed when they want to join a sorority? And how do they do it? Sounds kind of kinky when you think about it, but not that I'm really that interested in that aspect of it. Oh, boy. Yeah, Texas bill could let agencies bar gay, lesbian, not only gay, lesbian, but atheist and single parents from adopting. Lovely. All right, we'll talk more about it in just a bit here. It's Jim Walsh at Super Talk 1270 Online at supertalk1270.com. More conversation, your calls coming up. Not that I ever did, you know.
No, I don't look good naked anymore.
Glory Jeep to Bezos. Supertalk 1270, supertalk1270.com. Jim Walsh and you. You and yours. By the way, we'd love to hear from you, especially if you're a first-time caller. As we are deflowering first-time callers today. Yes, it's kind of messy, but it's all in good fun. I'm going to talk about distracted driving. Do you really... How seriously do you take all this distracted driving stuff? Another story here in good old North by God, Dakota. Some new legislation regarding driving distracted in our state. Under the new expanded law, a driver can be fined $100 for being distracted at the wheel. My problem with this is it kind of goes back to something we touched upon in our previous conversation about the footballs and the head injuries. Where is the solid evidence leading from the one to the other? If it's there, let's see it. We're not seeing a lot of it. We're hearing all these stories, a lot of what you call anecdotal evidence, you know. You take one person whose child or parent or friend died, apparently as a result of somebody texting while driving, and you say, see, this is why we got to do it. But, you know, one story, however sad, however tragic may be, one story doth not smart legislation make. In fact, in the law community, in the community of attorneys, I should say, they have an old saying, hard cases make for bad law. You shouldn't pass law based specifically on the hard luck cases, the really tragic stories. So, is it something you give a lot of thought to? Number 663-1270. Jim Walsh here, Super Talk 1270. Here's the deal. Under the new expanded North Dakota law, a driver can be fined $100 for being distracted. And, of course, they find somebody from the North Dakota, what was it, the North Dakota Safety Council, whatever that is. And this person is giving us, of course, the old scary story about how all these people out there are threatening us by texting while driving. Well, texting while driving is probably a pretty stupid thing to do. But the problem is, once they get that, they get on the old slippery slope and they start saying things like, oh, what about people talking on the phone while driving? Oh, what about people talking on the phone hands-free? I mean, we got them talking on the phone, but now they're saying, oh, it's okay, hands-free. Well, no, it's not, because people are going to that way. And next thing you know, it's going to be a thing where they're going to give you a ticket. They're going to pull you over and give you a ticket and give you a fine just for having the phone in the car. Do you think I'm kidding? Listen to this. In Washington State, right around the first of the year, they were talking about a law that would fine people $100 just for touching their iPhone or their smartphone or their cell phone while they were in the car. Not even looking at it, not even talking on it. And how the hell do you enforce something like that? But they're actually going to make it illegal with a fine if you physically touch your phone while you're driving. So don't think for 1 minute that it can't get ridiculous at some point, because it always does. It's the government we're talking about. But again, when you're at the wheel, yeah, you should pay attention. Shouldn't drink. You shouldn't do texting. Most of it's common sense, though. How many of these stories are really out there? Let me remind you of something. In the last few years, for all the big boom, boom, boom of the availability of things like iPhones and smartphones and droids, little miniature computer thingies that you can actually hold in your hand and talk on the phone and text with them and all this. I would remind you that overall there has been a decrease, mind you, in the number of traffic fatalities. There's not even a correlation here, let alone solid evidence for actual cause. But one of our local TV stations, they got this guy from the Safety Council, and he basically was, a lot of innuendo there, a lot of suggestion, a lot of implication, but not a lot of meat and potatoes. I'm not saying it's not worth a study. I'm just saying before we get all crazy and start getting goofy and stupid with some of our legislation, let's see if we can try and find out what the real story is, if there really is any connection here. But, of course, we're talking the government here. That's not how the government works. Anytime there's cause for a good scare and there's money in it, you know what's going to happen. It's always the case, follow the money. Follow the money. Let me look at some of the quotes here. They talk about, and again, some of it is just basic common sense, which I realize sometimes ain't so common. But now I love this here. Yeah, this is good. Listen to this. This is clutch. Keep in mind, reading the quote here, keep in mind that it's only the drivers on the scene of crashes that have admitted to it. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety estimates that the true number is more like 65 or 70%. I don't know. God forbid anybody here should be innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, let's assume that the problem is a lot worse than it really is, even though we don't know for sure. Yeah, all these people out there, they're all looking at their phones, and they're all getting into crashes, and they're all getting all banged up and hurt and killed and whatever, despite the fact that the overall level of traffic fatalities is going down. You ever notice, by the way, you don't hear so much about the DUI, drunken driving thing anymore. And there's a reason for that. It's because they actually succeeded in doing what they want to do. They wanted to decrease the level of drunken driving, and they have done so in many places. And again, overall, the level of that kind of thing is down. But of course, if you work for the government, you got to find some reason to justify what you're doing at the taxpayer's expense. You got to find some kind of threat to life as we know it, against which we must act to protect the people, and that means more of your money. Just saying, that seems to be how it works. I mean, think about it. It's basic economics what I'm talking about here. What is economics? It's the art of satisfying unlimited wants with limited resources. Well, the thing is, unlimited wants, one thing that means is you can always find something, theoretically or otherwise, that's a potential threat to life and limb that you need to be protected from. How ridiculous can it get? It doesn't matter, because the possibilities is literally endless. Because, again, we all have unlimited wants. We all want everything, and we all want it now. We want our cake, have our cake and eat it too. We want to be safe. We want to be able to live forever. We all want this. We all want that. Well, you can't have it. Except it's great if you're a government bureaucrat, because there's always going to be something that you can use to justify your very existence. And I don't text when I drive. To me, it's a common sense thing. I don't need a lot of people lecturing me about it. It just kind of makes sense to me. But what next? As down the slippery slope we go, they're gonna start ticketing us for having the radio on in the car. Of course, eventually we're going to get the driverless cars, but now I'm hearing that even in driverless cars, they're concerned about distraction. Well, what distraction can there be if you're not driving? What is there to be distracted from? I don't get it. Like Lenny Bruce said, you start applying common sense, that's when you really get messed up. 663-1270, Jim Walsh. Super Talk 1270. More conversation, your calls coming up.
Right now, it's 63.
The Red River Farm Network. Ag News is here on Super Talk 1270.
Well, I got a story here about an Indian mascot controversy. Haven't we pretty much moved on from that, at least here? You know, with the whole Fighting Sioux thing, now the Fighting, whatever they are, crap weasels or whatever. An acquaintance of mine who shall remain nameless, I don't want to call her out by name, but a lady I know who I exchanged comments with on the Facebook thingy there. She posted this comment about an activist lady in Washington State who succeeded, apparently, in getting one of the local colleges to get rid of their mascot, which in this case was, a Native American recreation. And her comment here: Indian mascots must end today, now. Ridiculous points of view to say it's a sign of honor. There is, she writes, no honor in being taunted and yelled at and or depicting a people in such a degrading way. Now, what she's referring to, I think, is in the article. They talk about how 30 years ago this woman was speaking out against it and people were, throwing cups of coffee and junk at her for saying that, and that's not right. Anyway, she goes on. She says, high school, college, professional sports, no place for racism. I don't know, though. Where do you really draw the line? Everybody draws a line at a different place. That's the problem, right? Where do you draw the line? I don't know. 663-1270. I'm inclined to say let the market deal with it. It's one of those things, if it's bad for business, they'll stop doing it. And we'll just leave it at that. It's kind of what happened with the so-called Fighting Sioux, right? No longer the Fighting Sioux. It got to be bad for business. No problem with that. But I remember talking about this issue a few years ago involving the two Major League Baseball teams. You know the ones I'm talking about, the one from Atlanta and the one from Cleveland. Now, would you not admit that there is kind of a difference there in the way those two particular mascots, if you will call them that, are depicted? You look at the Atlanta Braves. I'm actually old enough to remember when they were the Milwaukee Braves. That's how old a geezer I am. But if you look at the mascot for the Atlanta Braves, I think we would have to agree it's a pretty cool-looking character. It's the noble savage, if you will. Pretty cool-looking dude. On the other hand, you've got the Cleveland Indians caricature, which I like the way Don Imus put it. He said it looks like something that Mort Drucker or Al Jaffe would have drawn for Mad Magazine. Yeah, imagine getting off the airplane in this town with one of those hats on. See how long you'd survive in the city of Bismarck. So I suppose you could say it's racist, but sometimes it can be more racist than other times. That's what I'm saying. Everybody draws the line in their own place. My thought would be just let you can speak up about it. I don't think people should throw stuff at you for speaking up, but keep the government out of it. Let the market work. The market will work if you let it, eventually. Anyway. Stephen Colbert versus the FCC. Mr. Colbert, who finally seems to have found his groove as an evening talk host. Remember when he first came on, it seemed like he had trouble finding a real which way he wanted to go with the show. But now he's gotten better because apparently somebody got a hold of Colbert. And he said, look, Steve, just be yourself. Just be yourself. Don't worry about whether you want to be the old Colbert Show persona or something else. Don't be like Leno. Don't be like Kimmel. Just be Steve, okay? Just be just plain Steve, okay? Worry more about being real than being funny. And the thing was, it worked for him, worked beautifully. Colbert has come on. Ratings-wise, he's beating Fallon now. Or is it Kimmel? Well, the point is he's doing a lot better than he was. And in the last week or so, there's been this flap, this kerfuffle, if you will, regarding one of his many cracks at the Trump administration, which I personally enjoy immensely because I'm not a fan of the man, Trump, that is. But he did a monologue where, I can't use the exact word, I'll kind of talk around it here, I'll finesse it, saying, among other things, the president talks like a sign language gorilla who got hit in the head. In fact, he says, the only thing your mouth is good for is being Vladimir Putin's, and he uses a term here that I'm not going to use on the radio because I like getting a paycheck. Contemporary community standards and all that crap. Basically, the implication is that Vladimir is the pitcher and Donnie is the catcher. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. That's probably farther than I want to go with it, but you get the idea. And the monologue is on YouTube. You can watch it for yourself. And they bleeped it during the actual broadcast. And in the official YouTube feed, it remains bleeped. But everybody knows what it was he said. Well, the FCC actually went after him for it. And, a lot of our right-wing friends have a Fire Colbert campaign going. But what's interesting about this to me is the fact that the FCC, they are looking into it. But it isn't, as Reason Magazine points out, it isn't that they're singling him out for this one particular crack at the president. It's the fact that the FCC is doing what they have to do, and this is actually worse. The FCC is doing what it has to do, which is to investigate all complaints, because going back to the George W. Bush administration, there was a guy on the panel of the FCC, a fellow named Brent Bozell, whose big claim to fame was that he was Bill Buckley's nephew. And this Bozell guy is just one of these horrible people, a real blue nose, the kind of guy who gets offended by everything. And, of course, when the Bush people were in, the social conservatives, they got their piece of the action. This Bozell guy was actually on the advisory board of the FCC, and he starts wailing away about everything supposedly offensive, about everything. He's like Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. He's the guy who you picture in your mind sitting in front of the TV with all kinds of tapes around him and all kinds of notes, making copious notes on every time somebody on some sitcom shows off a naked ankle or says poo-poo. He's one of those kind of guys. And apparently the spirit of this clown, this Bozell guy, is still alive and well to some extent at the FCC. Again, they're just doing what they were told to do, mandated. But isn't it kind of ridiculous that the government has nothing better to do than send their bureaucrats running after talk show hosts for saying something naughty, late at night, mind you. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, sir. Your comments welcome, supertalk1270.com. Check out the website. Tell us what you think about it. I'm Jim Walsh for Supertalk 1270 and supertalk1270.com. Have a good one.